Trust the science. Do it.
Welcome to The Big Puzzle. In this podcast, we explore the subtle connections between science, religion, politics, economics, and history. One piece at a time, we unveil the big picture of this shared experience that we call life.
Today, we're going to be talking about probably one of the most important pieces in the big puzzle. I would say that it's a corner piece. It's a piece that connects two of the sides of the puzzle, and those two sides are science and faith. The usual approach is to consider that there's a conflict between science and faith. They cannot live together. They have to choose between one or the other. And I will try to explain why that's a wrong approach. Both science and faith have their role, their important, I would even say their essential role in our learning, in our experience of life, and both have to be considered. When does this apparent conflict arises is when you try to use them in the wrong domain. When you try to use science to solve problems that should be addressed by faith, or when we try to address problems that should be addressed by science, try to use faith. So in those cases, you're making mistakes. You will create a conflict where there shouldn't be. Interestingly enough, many of the issues that we have to deal with could be addressed both by science and by faith, and that is where you would obtain the most benefit from both. Let's use an example to illustrate the difference between science and faith. And let's think that there's two different lands, right? And those lands are separated by a chiasm. So you can move freely from one to the other. One is the land of facts, and the other is the land of truth. So the land of facts contains all the things that we can perceive. It's limited to our five senses. So everything that we can see, hear, smell, touch, or taste, those are considered to be facts. Those are replicable, at least with people who has the same senses that we do have. And so we can identify those facts in let's say, an objective way. So the scientific method is an attempt to bridge that gap, to go from the land of facts to the land of truth. The way it works is that, well, we observe the world around us and we start noticing certain patterns, certain things that repeat, or certain sequences that happen often, or things that come together. And we try to explain them. So what we would do is we would come with a hypothesis. So try to explain how these things are connected. Then we come up with an experiment that will test that hypothesis. And we will be taking measurements and following procedures that could be repeatable, that could be transmittable to other people. And then we extract conclusions. Did our experiment prove our hypothesis? And then we can move one step closer. We build that bridge one step closer towards the land of truth. So that is how science tries to bridge that gap. There's a problem, though, that is usually not addressed correctly. And that's when we start creating that false conflict between faith and science. And that happens when people believe that they landed, that they completed the bridge, that they actually found the truth through science. Why that is never the case? Well, because science, by definition, cannot tell you what is true. So many times in the past, people believed that science had finally made it, that they had finally proved things like they were. But you just need one new fact that doesn't fit the explanation that you had, doesn't fit the theory that you had so far, to destroy that theory. And you need to rethink everything. So for many years, people believe, for example, that the Earth was the center of the universe. So they explain how the moon and the sun, rotated around the Earth and also the planets and the stars and everything. The Earth-centric, the Ptolemaic model of the universe, well, it was what was accepted because with the tools that they had, basically just observing the skies, yeah, it makes sense. It really looks like that. It looks like the moon and the sun are moving around. You see them going around and around every day. But with better instruments and, and trying to understand why planets moved in such weird ways that they move, change directions in the sky, well, eventually that became too complicated to explain with that simplistic model. So they realized that's not the truth. Right? It's not the truth that they believe it was. And they had to come up with a better model. And it took some time to convince all the people that the science, as they saw it, was wrong. And they had to abandon that Earth-centric model to an heliocentric model. But then they realized that even that wouldn't explain everything, the galaxy. And so all these revolutions in science have happened, proving that what you thought to be true was really not true. Even in physics, there has been some revolutions. Obviously, the theory of relativity, quantum physics, there's always something that you, through better measurements, through better instruments, through better understanding, you have to redefine, you have to rethink new hypotheses and come up with new theories. Again, everybody always thought that they were at the peak of the science. And the same thing happened today. So people are claiming that we can achieve truth through science. And truth is that you cannot. So when somebody says, oh, you should trust the science, they're basically anti-science because you should never trust the science. Science is supposed to be distrusted all the time. It has to be questioned, has to be probed, has to be attacked all the time and to make it better, right? So science improves when you challenge it, when you find problems with it that would lead to new questions. So science is a way, after all, to come up with new questions all the time. When you answer one, two new questions appear. And before we talk about faith, let me do a little side note here. When I'm talking about faith and I'm talking about science, I'm talking about good faith and good science. Because you have bad versions of both. You have bad science. People here now are claiming that the earth is flat and they have their own experiments, right? Obviously, their reasoning is flawed. They don't understand basic concepts of mathematics, physics, whatever. And all the conclusions are wrong. But in a certain way, it is science. They're coming with hypotheses. We're testing them and coming to conclusions, even though the everything is wrong the way they're doing it. But when I'm talking about science, I'm not talking about that kind of science. Let's assume that there is a true way of science. And that's the one, the pure science. That's the one I'm talking about. And the same thing happens with faith. So faith, we will be talking next about that. But there's wrong ways to have faith. Not everything is the same. Not everything is comparable. So I don't think we'll be covering today what constitutes a good faith, but let's make sure that we understand that we're talking about that one, right? And many others that claim to be faith do not qualify as good faith. So faith is the mirror of science. It's an attempt to build a bridge from the land of truth towards the land of facts. And it has the same characteristics. With faith, you can start with truth and you try to find facts that support your truth. But if you claim that you found those facts, well, that's not faith. Right? Faith cannot find the facts, cannot complete that bridge. So there's this definition about faith that says faith is not to have a perfect knowledge of things. That would be finding the facts. Therefore, if you have faith, you hope for things which are not seen, and I would add perceived with the five senses, which are true. So that is interesting because we're so biased in the modern world to see everything through the lens of objectivity, through the lens of those five senses, that it's difficult for us to accept that you can know that something is true even though you don't know the facts. You can't connect it to facts, to objective things. But that requires something that some people won't accept. There is more than just five senses. And that knowledge of the truth, we will discuss it in other pieces of the puzzle. But for now, let's say that there is a way that is also replicable, that is also repeatable, that is also transferable in the sense that you can tell other people how to do that. But everybody has that ability to recognize that something is true. That's why we have expression like it rings true, right? It feels true. And I have to make another distinction here because now we live in a time where people create this dichotomy between thinking and feeling. And when I'm talking about feeling in the sense of feeling that something is true, I'm not talking about relativism. I'm not talking that, oh, different people will feel different things because true is only one, right? There's no many different truths. So when we're talking about feeling, we're not talking about emotions. We're talking about more of convictions. Something that you feel internally, even if you disagree with that, even if you don't like the consequences of that truth, you still know it's true, right? And it's something that in the modern world, with extreme secularization, I would say, we lose it. And maybe when we're younger, we had it, but then by ignoring it over and over, no, it atrophies. But it's a sense as valid as the other five. And let's put this other analogy. How would you describe color to somebody who refuses to use sight, or that says that sight doesn't exist? That is a made up thing. So how do you explain color? Yeah, you could technically explain it, but they won't accept it. So if you reject one of your five senses, though some of the thing, ironically, wouldn't make sense. The same thing happened with this, right? So if we don't accept that there are some senses that allows us to know what is true, even when we can't find the facts, we will never understand it. We will never accept it. So one example I would put is the existence of God. So can we prove that God exists? Can we find the facts that would prove that God exists? Can we go from the true of God existing to the facts in our observable world to say, okay, yeah, these are the proofs? Not really. And that is by design. The same way that science is not supposed to close, to bridge completely that gap, faith, faith is not supposed to bridge it from the other side. So that is the interesting thing. So there's a symmetry in faith and science. Both are so important, both are so critical for us to take the most from this experience that, like I said in the introduction, this shared experience that we call life. Another little side note, at this point you might think, well, this is what I'm saying is based on Plato, Aristotle, or some of the old philosophers, the world of ideas. Well, it really isn't. Obviously, there's some parallelisms. I think that these very smart guys of the past had the right impression about what was going on, but some of them are not completely correct, in my opinion. I don't know, Plato versus me. But just wanted to mention that. And another thing I wanted to mention is that, well, you might think, well, this is great. Now we can say that, science builds the bridge from the land of facts, and faith builds the bridge from the land of truth, and they meet in the middle. No, it doesn't work that way. They're not, in this analogy, they're not located in the same position. But there's a reason for that. I don't think that we're supposed to complete those bridges. We're supposed to put the effort and we will grow. So by science, our minds, our intellect, our reasoning will strengthen. And by faith, our spirits, our wisdom will also grow. And if you think about it, well, it's similar to our brains, right? So we have the different lobes in the brain with different approaches to reality. So we can say that one is more objective and the other is more subjective, even though I don't like this subjective for the idea of faith, but could be applied. Many people who try to address this, they use some analogies to say how faith and science work together. And some of the examples I remember, well, somebody mentioned it's like a plane. A plane has two wings and it cannot fly with one wing alone. Yes, kind of. The other one said, well, it's like a bicycle. You know, sometimes you have to press the pedal of science and you have to press the pedal of faith. And with the two, you start moving. You need both to move forward. Yes, I also think it's a nice analogy. But the one I like the most is our eyes, right? So for our eyes to work properly, to be able to perceive depth, perceive distances, they have to be in different positions. Each one of our eyes is looking at a slightly different view. If both eyes would be seeing exactly the same view, then we wouldn't have what is called parallax. So that parallax is the difference between the two images that our brain process and finds the distance, the depth based on that parallax. So it's so important that our eyes are seeing things from a different point of view. That's why I like the idea of science being one eye and faith being the other eye. And yes, they won't see the same thing the same way. But if you use both, you could, find way more information. It's much more useful than having just one eye. So that's the analogy that I prefer to say that science and faith, they have to give us a different description of reality. One, again, based on facts and reasoning, and the other based on truth and convictions. So in future pieces of the puzzle, we're going to try to analyze some cases where both views are relevant. I can remember in watch of the previous videos, I hinted at this, right? That both, again, religion as a substitute of faith, even though they're not the same thing, and again, assuming that there is a true religion, right? It's not just interchangeable that you could use any religion, but if there is a true religion, and I believe there is a true faith, and also there is a true science. How many of the problems that we are facing, some of the societal problems, should be addressed by both. We need to think what both have to say before making a decision. I hope that it lets you think a little more. I haven't given a homework for this one, but I think it's pretty evident. So think about the problems that society is facing, even some personal problems that you might having. How would you address them from the science, from the reason point of view? How would you address it from the faith point of view? How would those two visions interact, and how you could find a better answer by looking at both? You'd be surprised at how practical the things that I was talking about really are. So, hope to see you in the next ones. Thank you again for helping me place this piece of the big puzzle. If you like it, please subscribe if you didn't, share with some other people, and really hope to see you in the next one. Bye.